June 23rd readings. Irenaeus of Lyons, Against Heresies, Book 2, Chapter 3-4. The created world is not a mistake. It reflects the mind of God. The Valentinians claim that a being called Bythus, dwelling with his so-called Pleroma, is the source of all divine fullness. Marcion proposes a different God altogether, but both are fundamentally flawed. If they say something lies beneath or beyond this Bythus, a thing they call emptiness or shadow, then they've made that emptiness greater than the Pleroma itself. That alone shows the contradiction. Even worse, they say that although this being contains everything within himself, someone else created the world. That's impossible, for their belief demands a realm of chaos below the spiritual realm in which the world came into being. And they must then say their supreme being, the Propator, left that chaos alone. Why? Was he unaware of what would arise from it? Then he's not all-knowing. Was he aware and let it unfold anyway? Then the responsibility is his. And if he foresaw what would come and mentally envisioned creation beforehand, then he also created it, because the one who conceives something and sees it realized is the one who brought it into being. The mind of God and the act of creation are one. They need to stop claiming that someone else made the world. The moment God envisions something, it is as good as made. You can't separate thought from action in the divine will. It is absurd to suggest that one being imagined creation and another one actually brought it to life. That makes no sense. According to their view, God mentally conceived either a world that is eternal or one that is temporary, but both can't be true. If he envisioned an eternal, spiritual, visible world, then that's what would exist. But since the world is not like that, since it is mixed, subject to change, and mortal, then that is how God must have intended it. It exists as it does because he willed it to be so. It reflects what he imagined. And that means the world, even as it is, fragile, changing, complex, is a worthy product of God's intention. So to say this world is the result of a flaw or of ignorance is not only wrong, it's blasphemous. It makes God the one who conceived of error and birthed ignorance, because it claims that the things he thought into being came from defect instead of wisdom. The myth of the vacuum collapses under its own weight. We should ask why God would allow such a situation as the heretics describe, but we must never say someone else made the world. Everything came from God's plan and was prepared just as it now exists. There's no need to invent imaginary shadows or vacuums to explain creation, but if such a vacuum did exist, where did it come from? If their so-called Father and Creator made it, then the vacuum must be of equal dignity with the other aeons, maybe even older. And if it came from the same divine source, then it must be like the one who produced it, as well as like the other aeons made with it. That would mean Bythus himself and his companion, Silence, Sage, would have to be like a vacuum, in other words, empty and without substance. And so would all the aeons, being siblings of the vacuum. But if the vacuum wasn't created by God, then it must have created itself. And in that case, it's just as eternal and honorable as Bythus. Either way, their system collapses. So let's be clear. Either someone made the vacuum, which makes them just as empty, or it sprang from nothing and is as divine and eternal as their highest God. And if that's true, then the vacuum is more ancient and more exalted than the lesser aeons of Ptolemy, Heraclion, and all the others who teach this nonsense. If all things are within God, then nothing can be defective now. If cornered, they might retreat and say that the Father contains all things within himself, and that nothing exists outside the Pleroma. They might say outside and inside simply describe levels of knowledge, not physical space. In that case, they'll claim that the world we know was made by angels, or a Demiurge, and still lies within the Father's greatness, like a dot in a circle or a blemish on a robe. But this just creates more problems. What kind of supreme being allows such a blemish within his own being? Why would he let someone else create something in his territory, against his own will? If he had the power to remove that defect later, he could have prevented it from ever showing up. Either he allowed the creation to be as it is because it couldn't have been any other way, or he failed to stop a flaw from developing within himself. Either way, he ends up responsible for the outcome. And if things couldn't be made differently from the start, then they'll never change. What can't be fixed at the beginning can't be fixed later. So how can they talk about reaching perfection if the very beings who made us, whether angels or the Demiurge, are defective? And if, as they say, God later showed compassion and offered perfection to humanity, then he should have first had compassion on those creators and perfected them. That way, men would have been made perfect by perfect beings. But if he didn't pity the creators first, he allowed them to fall into blindness, and only afterward tried to fix the damage they caused. That's not justice, that's confusion. You cannot have darkness inside divine light. Their claim that creation took place in some kind of shadow or vacuum falls apart completely if, as they say, all things were formed within the territory of the Father. If the Father's light fills and illuminates everything inside him, then how could any space of darkness or emptiness possibly exist within him? If they're going to argue that this world was formed in some separate, unclaimed space within God, then they must identify an actual place inside the Pleroma, inside the Father, that is not filled with his light, not under his rule, and left open for angels or the Demiurge to create freely. And it couldn't be a small place either. The entire visible universe would need a lot of room. So now they are forced to imagine a region inside their divine Father, a space that is empty, unformed, and filled with darkness, where creation supposedly happened. But that means the Father's light doesn't reach all parts of himself. It would be like saying there are dark corners inside the sun. And that's blasphemous. In trying to explain creation as the result of a flaw or mistake, they end up placing error and imperfection inside the very being they say is the source of all perfection. In doing so, they don't just insult creation, they insult the nature of the Father himself. Augustine of Hippo, The Confessions, Book 10, Chapter 29, Section 40. All hope is in God's mercy alone. All my hope rests in nothing but your overwhelming mercy. You can command whatever you will, but grant what you command. You ask us to practice self-control, but even one of your servants once said, I realized I couldn't gain it unless God gave it to me. That too is wisdom, to know that virtue itself is a gift from you. Through self-control, we're gathered back into unity, we who had scattered ourselves into many loves, many desires. But no one truly loves you who still loves anything else alongside you that they don't love because of you. O love, always burning, never consumed, O holy charity, my God, set me on fire. You call us to be pure and undivided, so give what you command and command what you will. Thomas Aquinas, Summa Theologica, Part 1, Question 86, Article 4. Can the human intellect know the future? Objection. It seems our intellect can know future things. After all, we predict eclipses, weather patterns, and even trends in human behavior. So it seems the future is within the grasp of human knowledge. Responsio. Our intellect by nature comes to know truth through sensory experience. We gather information from what is present and, based on that, infer what is past or future. But strictly speaking, our intellect does not know future events directly. Future things do not yet exist, and since our knowledge depends on things being present to the senses, we cannot grasp what has not yet come to be. What we can know are causes and patterns. When we understand the causes of something, we may be able to predict what is likely to occur. This is how astronomers forecast eclipses and doctors anticipate the course of a disease. But this kind of knowledge is not certainty about the future as it is in itself. It's a projection, grounded in the present state of things and their natural outcomes. On the other hand, God knows the future differently. He knows all things in a single, eternal act. Past, present, and future are all now to him, but we do not have that kind of vision. We see the future only darkly, by signs, probabilities, or divine revelation. When prophets speak of the future, it's not by natural intellect, but by God's illumination. Quick summa. We can't know the future in itself, only as something probable or revealed, based on causes present now. Illustrative story. Zachary and the unread letter. Zachary stood by the mailbox, envelope in hand, debating whether to read the letter his sister had sent. She had moved away weeks ago, and he hadn't heard from her since. He wondered what the letter contained. Good news? A request for help? Bad news? He thought back on her last phone call. Her tone had been hopeful. She had just started a new job. Probably good news. But he didn't know, not really. All he had were signs, memories, guesses. He could predict, but until he opened the letter, the future remained hidden. This is how our intellect approaches the future. Like Zachary before the unopened envelope, we might guess what's coming. We might even be right. But the truth of what's inside belongs to a moment we haven't yet reached. Only when it arrives, only when the letter is opened, can we truly know. And unlike Zachary, who eventually opens the letter, we don't always get to open the envelope of tomorrow. That belongs to God.